My mom screamed, "Beg him for forgiveness or leave." When I told her I was done after my husband Beckett forgot to pick up our daughter Eden from daycare for the third time because he was playing poker with his friends. We were standing in my parents' living room, where I'd fled after the latest disaster. My mother's face was red, her finger jabbing at me like a weapon. Behind her, my father sat silent in his recliner, not even looking up from his newspaper. Eden clung to my leg, her little fingers twisted in my jeans, while my mother's words echoed off the walls like gunshots. "You're overreacting, Willow," Vera continued, her voice dripping with disgust. "So he forgot a few times. Men aren't programmed for these things. You should be grateful he works hard to provide for you." She turned to my father for backup, who finally lowered his newspaper just enough to nod. The casual dismissal of my exhaustion, of Eden's terror at being the last child waiting in an empty daycare parking lot for the third time, made something inside me crack. I felt my jaw tighten as I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, fingers moving deliberately as every eye in the room fixed on me. I pulled up a folder I'd been building for months and turned the screen toward my mother. I'm Willow, 34 years old, and until that moment in my parents' living room, I'd been the dutiful daughter who married the good man they chose for me, who excused his selfishness as boys being boys, who shrunk myself smaller and smaller to accommodate his expanding sense of entitlement. 7 years of marriage to Beckett had taught me that loving someone who loves themselves more will slowly erase you. What my mother didn't know, what nobody knew except my lawyer and my bank manager, was that I'd been planning my exit for 6 months. Ever since the first time I had to leave my office job early to rescue my terrified 5-year-old from a locked daycare because my husband chose cards over his child. The folder on my phone contained time-stamped photos, documented text exchanges, and a paper trail that would make Beckett wish he'd prioritized his family over his poker buddies. The marriage had started like a fairy tale, or at least what my family considered one. Beckett came from a good family in our Michigan town, meaning his parents belonged to the same country club as mine, and his father golfed with my father every Sunday. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, my mother planned the wedding before I'd even said yes. Looking back, I realize I was more in love with the idea of being chosen than with Beckett himself. He was handsome in a conventional way, had a steady job as a regional sales manager, and knew exactly what to say to my parents. To them, he was perfect. To me, he was safe, predictable, the logical next step. The first year passed in a blur of newlywed domesticity. I worked full-time as an administrative coordinator at a medical supply company, while Beckett traveled for sales meetings. We bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. I did most of the cooking, cleaning, and planning, because that's what my mother had modeled. Beckett praised my efforts with the same enthusiasm he used for his favorite football team. Affectionate but distant, present but not engaged. I told myself this was what mature love looked like, steady and comfortable. Eden arrived 2 years into our marriage, a surprise pregnancy that derailed my plans to pursue a master's degree. Beckett seemed excited about becoming a father, attending prenatal appointments and reading parenting books with genuine interest. For a few months, I thought the baby would bring us closer. Instead, it exposed the fundamental inequality in our partnership. While I took 12 weeks of unpaid maternity leave and returned to work exhausted, Beckett resumed his normal schedule without adjustment. His life continued unchanged while mine was completely reconstructed around our daughter's needs. The division of labor became stark and non-negotiable. I handled all nighttime feedings, diaper changes, doctor appointments, and daycare logistics. Beckett occasionally played with Eden when it was convenient, usually when friends or family were watching, performing fatherhood for an audience. He considered watching his own daughter babysitting and expected praise for basic parenting tasks. When I tried to discuss a more equitable arrangement, he reminded me that his sales job required flexibility and that my desk job was easier to manage around childcare demands. My mother agreed with him, suggesting I should feel grateful for a husband who provided financially. As Eden grew from infant to toddler, the gaps in Beckett's parenting became more obvious and more dangerous. He regularly forgot crucial information about her routine, her allergies, her schedule. I created detailed lists and calendars, sent reminder texts, left notes on the refrigerator. Nothing worked because he simply wasn't paying attention. His priorities remained unchanged. Work, poker nights with his friends, Sunday golf with his father, fantasy football leagues, and somewhere near the bottom of that list, his family. The first daycare incident happened 6 months ago on a Thursday evening. I was in a mandatory staff meeting that ran late, something I'd texted Beckett about that morning and reminded him of at lunch. Daycare closed at 6. At 6:15, I received a frantic call from the director saying Eden was the only child left and nobody had answered their calls to Beckett's phone. I left the meeting immediately, driving through rush hour traffic with my heart pounding, calling Beckett repeatedly with no answer. When I finally arrived at 6:45, I found Eden sitting in the director's office, her face blotchy from crying, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. The director's expression was professional, but concerned as she explained they'd had no choice but to wait with Eden, since they couldn't reach either parent. My daughter's first words when she saw me were, "I thought you forgot about me." The guilt and rage that flooded through me in that moment nearly knocked me over. I apologized profusely to the director, scooped up Eden, and drove home barely holding back tears. Beckett arrived home at 8:30, smelling faintly of beer and cigarettes, surprised by my anger. He'd been at his weekly poker game and left his phone in the car. When I confronted him about leaving our daughter abandoned at daycare, he was defensive rather than apologetic. "It was one time," he argued. "These things happen. You're overreacting." My mother, when I called her for support, agreed with him. "Mistakes happen," she said. "Don't make a mountain out of a molehill." I swallowed my fury and tried to believe them, adding more reminders to Beckett's phone calendar and making him promise to keep his ringer on. The second incident was 5 weeks later, almost identical circumstances. I had a dental appointment I'd mentioned repeatedly, and Beckett assured me he had pickup covered. At 6:20, another call from the daycare director, her tone noticeably cooler this time. I canceled the rest of my appointment, still numb from Novocaine, and raced to the daycare. Eden was calmer this time, but wouldn't look at me when I arrived. A quiet disappointment that hurt worse than her tears. The director pulled me aside and gently suggested that perhaps I needed to ensure clearer communication with my husband about pickup responsibilities. The subtle blame in her words, the implication that I had failed to manage my husband properly, made my stomach turn. Beckett's excuse that evening was that his poker game had switched to an earlier time and he'd lost track. Again, he minimized my anger, suggesting I was being emotional and unreasonable. When I mentioned the director's concern, he became angry, accusing me of making him look bad to strangers. My father, when I tried to discuss it with him, suggested I stop nagging Beckett and find a backup plan for pickup. The message was clear. This was my problem to solve, my failure to manage adequately. I started building my exit strategy that night. I contacted a divorce attorney, opened a separate bank account, began documenting every failed promise and missed responsibility. I researched family court procedures, gathered financial records, and quietly photographed important documents. I smiled through Sunday dinners and family gatherings, playing the role of dutiful wife while systematically dismantling the foundation of my marriage. If Beckett noticed my emotional withdrawal, he never mentioned it, too absorbed in his own pursuits to recognize the woman beside him was becoming a stranger. The third incident was the breaking point, not because it was worse than the previous two, but because it revealed Beckett's complete indifference to the pattern he'd established. It was a Friday evening, the end of a brutal week at work. I had specifically asked him that morning if he could handle pickup, because I had a critical project deadline. He assured me it was handled, even acted slightly offended that I would question him. I pushed aside my anxiety and stayed at the office to finish the presentation that had consumed my week. At 6:30, my phone rang. The daycare director's voice was clipped and professional as she informed me that, once again, Eden was the last child and Beckett was unreachable. This time, she added that if this pattern continued, they would need to reevaluate our enrollment. The threat of losing our daycare spot, the only facility near my office with availability, sent panic through me. I left my unfinished presentation and drove to the daycare, my hands shaking with rage. Eden was sitting on the floor of the director's office, no longer crying, just silent. The resignation in her 5-year-old face broke something fundamental inside me. When we got to the car, she asked in a small voice, "Why doesn't Daddy remember me?" I had no answer that wouldn't require explaining adult selfishness to a kindergartner. I drove directly to my parents' house instead of home, needing witnesses for whatever confrontation was coming. When I called Beckett, he answered on the 4th ring, laughing at something in the background, the poker game. Again. He'd forgotten, again, but this time, instead of apologizing, he sighed with annoyance at my hysterics and told me he'd be home when the game finished. The casual dismissal of his daughter's abandonment the 3rd time finally crystallized my resolve. My mother, after hearing my tearful explanation, immediately sided with Beckett. That's when she screamed at me to beg forgiveness or leave, setting in motion the confrontation that would end my marriage and eventually reveal exactly how much planning I'd done to protect myself and my daughter from the wreckage. The photo I showed my mother was time-stamped from 2 hours earlier. It showed Beckett at his usual poker table, cards in hand, beer bottle beside him, laughing with his friends. What made it damning was the text message thread displayed above it. My message from that morning. Critical. I have deadline tonight. You promised to get Eden. Daycare closes at 6. Please confirm. His response at 9:15 that morning, got it covered. Stop worrying so much. And then, at 6:43 that evening, after the daycare had already called me, his message. Shit, sorry, lost track of time. You get her? My mother's face went pale as she scrolled through the evidence. There were dozens of similar exchanges, each one showing Beckett's promises followed by his failures. But the real revelation was the financial documents I'd also stored in that folder. Bank statements showing Beckett had lost over $40,000 in poker games over the past 18 months. Money he'd been siphoning from our joint account, and his business expense account, credit card bills for charges at bars and casinos I'd never heard him mention, and most damning texts to his poker buddies discussing how to hide his gambling losses from his controlling wife. "This doesn't prove anything," Vera said, but her voice had lost its certainty. She handed my phone back like it was contaminated. "Men need outlets. You're invading his privacy by tracking his spending. I'm protecting my daughter from a man who gambles away her college fund and forgets she exists," I said quietly. Eden had finally let go of my leg and was playing with blocks in the corner, young enough not to understand but old enough to sense the tension. "I'm not begging anyone for forgiveness. I'm filing for divorce on Monday." My father finally set down his newspaper completely. "Willow, think about what you're doing. Divorce is expensive, messy. Eden needs her father. Eden needs a parent who shows up," I replied. "She has one. That's enough." What they didn't know was that I'd spent 6 months building an airtight case with my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Patricia had advised me to document everything, and I had. Every missed pickup, every broken promise, every dollar spent on poker instead of our family. I had testimony lined up from the daycare director, from my co-workers who'd witnessed my repeated emergency departures, from our marriage counselor who'd noted Beckett's consistent refusal to accept accountability. I'd also done something my parents would consider unforgivable. I'd hired a private investigator 3 months ago when Beckett's work trips became more frequent and his explanations more vague. The investigator's report sat in a sealed envelope in Patricia's office, and its contents would destroy any sympathy Beckett might expect in divorce proceedings. I hadn't opened it myself yet. Some truths require the right moment, and I was saving that moment for when it would cause maximum impact. My mother tried a different tactic, softening her voice. "Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but breaking up a family over a few mistakes? Think about Eden. She deserves to grow up in a stable home with both parents. Eden deserves to grow up knowing her worth isn't measured by her ability to excuse someone's bad behavior," I said, looking directly at my mother. "She deserves to see what it looks like when someone chooses self-respect over convenience." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother's face cycled through emotions, settling finally on cold disapproval. "If you do this, don't expect us to support you. We raised you better than to throw away a good man over poker nights and forgetting pickup a few times." 3 times, I corrected. 3 times he left his daughter waiting alone in an empty parking lot because cards were more important. "And it's not about the poker nights, Mom. It's about a grown man who can't prioritize his own child over his entertainment." What I didn't tell them was that I'd already secured everything I needed. The house was in both our names, but I'd been making the mortgage payments from my account for the past year, while Beckett's contributions mysteriously dwindled. I had proof of that. I'd also transferred half of our joint savings to my separate account the week before, exactly what Patricia said I was entitled to protect. Beckett hadn't noticed because he never checked the statements. I'd photographed his gambling losses, his hidden credit cards, his business expense reports showing charges at strip clubs during supposed client dinners. My mother stood abruptly. "You're making a terrible mistake, Willow. When you come to your senses and realize what you've thrown away, don't expect us to help you pick up the pieces." "I won't need your help," I said, gathering Eden's toys into her backpack. "I've been picking up pieces by myself for 7 years. I'm good at it now." As I buckled Eden into her car seat 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Beckett. "Your mom called. Said you're being dramatic again. Come home so we can talk like adults." The condescension in those words, the assumption that I was the problem requiring management, strengthened my resolve. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the extended stay hotel where I'd already booked a 2-bedroom suite for the next month, paid in full from my separate account. Eden fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the emotional day. I sat in the dim light of the hotel room, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of what I'd started. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and texts from Beckett, each one escalating from confused to annoyed to angry. I blocked his number and sent a single email. "My attorney will contact you Monday morning. All communication goes through her from now on. Do not contact me directly." The response came within seconds. "You're insane. I'm not playing these games. Come home now." I deleted the email and opened my laptop. Patricia had prepared all the divorce paperwork weeks ago, waiting only for my signal to file. I reviewed the documents one final time. Petition for dissolution of marriage, emergency custody order, restraining order if needed, division of assets, documentation of Beckett's gambling losses and financial irresponsibility, witness statements from the daycare, everything organized and ready. My finger hovered over the approve button that would send everything to Patricia for Monday's filing. Before I could second-guess myself, I clicked approve. An automated response confirmed receipt and informed me that papers would be filed at 9 Monday morning. Beckett would be served at his office by noon. The process I'd been planning for 6 months was now in motion, irreversible and accelerating. I felt simultaneously terrified and more alive than I had in years. My phone lit up with another call from my mother. I silenced it and turned off my phone completely. Whatever she had to say could wait. Eden needed stability, not drama. I needed sleep before the storm hit. Because when Beckett received those divorce papers, when he saw the evidence I'd compiled, when he realized I wasn't bluffing or being emotional or having a dramatic episode, his response would be explosive. I'd seen his temper before, carefully controlled around others but vicious when we were alone. This time, I was prepared. The private investigator's sealed report sat in my purse, still unopened. Patricia had warned me its contents were significant and would substantially impact proceedings. Part of me wanted to rip it open immediately, to know exactly what ammunition I had. Another part wanted to save that revelation, to deploy it strategically when Beckett thought he had the upper hand. Timing was everything in war. And make no mistake, this would be war. Monday morning arrived with false sunshine, the kind of bright winter day that feels like a lie. I'd taken the entire week off work, telling my supervisor only that I had a family emergency. Eden was enrolled temporarily at a new daycare near the hotel, one that didn't know Beckett and had strict pickup protocols I'd verified personally. I'd already provided them with photos of approved adults and explicit instructions that only I was authorized to collect her. Patricia called at 9:15. Papers are filed. Process server is heading to Beckett's office now. You should expect contact within the hour, probably furious contact. Are you somewhere safe? Hotel room, door locked, security notified, I confirmed. I'd briefed the hotel staff that morning that I was separating from my husband, and under no circumstances should they provide him room information or access. The front desk manager, a woman about my age with sympathetic eyes, had flagged my account immediately. Good, keep your phone on record if he calls. Everything from this point forward is evidence. Patricia paused. Willow, I need to ask again about the sealed report. Are you ready to review the contents? It's going to change the trajectory significantly. My hand tightened on the phone. What's in it? Better if we review in person. Can you come to my office at 2? The careful neutrality in her voice sent anxiety crawling up my spine, but also a strange anticipation. Whatever the investigator had found, it was substantial enough that Patricia wanted to see my reaction in person, to manage my response professionally. I'll be there, I said. Beckett's first call came at 11:43, exactly 90 minutes after he would have been served. I let it go to voicemail, per Patricia's instructions. The message was predictable. Shock, anger, accusations that I'd ambushed him, demands that I call immediately. The second call came 3 minutes later, more aggressive. The third was pure rage, his voice shaking with fury as he called me every degrading name he could think of. I saved all 3 voicemails and emailed them to Patricia. Then came the texts, dozens of them in rapid succession. You're destroying our family over nothing. You'll regret this when you're alone and broke. My lawyer says you don't have shit. I'll make sure you never see Eden again. That last one was a mistake on his part. A direct threat that Patricia would use to bolster our custody petition. I screenshot everything and forwarded it immediately. My mother called next. Beckett's mother just called me crying. How could you humiliate him like this at his workplace? Served with divorce papers in front of his colleagues? He humiliated himself by gambling away our savings and abandoning his daughter repeatedly. I replied calmly. The service location was his attorney's choice of employment address. Standard procedure. You've been planning this, she accused. Sneaking around, documenting things, building a case like he's some criminal. What kind of wife does that? The kind who protects her child from an irresponsible father, I said. The kind who doesn't believe she deserves to be treated like an afterthought in her own marriage. You're being selfish and cruel, Vera hissed. That man loves you. That man loves himself, I corrected. He loves what I provide. Clean house, managed schedule, childcare, ego maintenance. He doesn't love me, Mom. He probably never did. She hung up without another word. My father called an hour later, his approach more measured but equally condemning. Your mother is very upset. This is tearing the family apart. Beckett tore it apart when he chose poker over parenting, I said tiredly. I'm just cleaning up the pieces. There are ways to work through these things, he insisted. Marriage counseling, compromises, nuclear options should be last resorts. We tried counseling. He attended 3 sessions before declaring it a waste of time and refusing to go back. I tried compromises for 7 years. I'm done trying. Patricia's office was downtown, 13th floor of a glass tower that screamed expensive legal representation. I'd maxed out a credit card to afford her retainer, but her reputation for destroying unfaithful or negligent spouses was worth every penny. She met me in the lobby personally, her expression carefully neutral as she led me to a private conference room. The sealed envelope sat on the polished table like an unexploded bomb. Patricia sat across from me, hands folded professionally. Before you open this, I want to prepare you. The investigator was very thorough. What's inside will be difficult to process, but it substantially strengthens your case for full custody and favorable asset division. My hand shook slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were dozens of photographs, all time-stamped and location tagged. The first few showed Beckett at various casinos, confirming the gambling I already knew about. Then came photos from bars and restaurants. Beckett with groups of friends, nothing particularly damning. I flipped through faster, confused about what had Patricia so concerned. Then I found them. Photos of Beckett outside a residence I didn't recognize, unlocking the door with his own key. Photos of him inside with a woman, Younger than me, brunette, attractive. Photos of them on a couch, intimate in ways that erased any possibility of innocent explanation. The timestamps showed a pattern. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the nights he claimed he had late work meetings. The investigator had documented 12 separate visits over 2 months. I set the photos down carefully, my hands suddenly steady. The shock I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. How long? Based on utility records for the apartment, he's been paying for that lease for 14 months, Patricia said quietly. We've identified the woman as Amber Hastings, 26, works as a dental hygienist. No criminal record, no apparent knowledge that Beckett is married. 14 months, I repeated. More than a year of lying, sneaking, maintaining a separate life while I managed our household and raised our daughter alone. The gambling was bad enough, but this betrayal was comprehensive. A complete double life financed with money that should have secured our family's future. Patricia slid another document across the table. Bank records show he's been spending approximately $3,000 monthly on that apartment and associated expenses. That's in addition to the poker losses, which average another $2,000 monthly. He's been hemorrhaging money on his double life while you've been covering the mortgage and household expenses. The numbers were staggering. $5,000 monthly for over a year. $60,000 gone. While I clipped coupons and delayed dental work to save money, the daycare that he kept forgetting to pick Eden up from, I'd been paying that entirely from my salary, while his money funded his affair and his poker habit. Does the girlfriend know about Eden? I asked. Unknown. The investigator didn't approach her directly, but based on social media surveillance, she posts regularly about her relationship with her person, without ever showing his face or naming him. She appears to believe they're in an exclusive relationship. A plan began forming, cold and precise. I want copies of everything. And I want the investigator to continue surveillance through the divorce proceedings. I want to know every move he makes. Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw approval flash in her eyes. Already arranged. We'll document any attempts to hide assets or influence witnesses. Anything else? The girlfriend. When do we tell her the truth? That depends on your goal, Patricia said carefully. We could inform her now, potentially creating a hostile witness against Beckett, or we could wait until proceedings are underway, deploy the information strategically, when it has maximum impact. I thought about Amber Hastings, 26 years old, believing she was in a loving relationship with a single man. She was a victim too, just not one I had energy to protect, but she could be useful. Wait until the custody hearing. I want him to think that affair is still hidden, still his secret advantage. Then we reveal it publicly, with her present if possible. Calculated, Patricia observed. I like it. Anything else? I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I'd been building. I want to file a complaint with his company about expense report fraud. These charges? I showed her screenshots of business expense reports claiming client dinners on dates the investigator had photographed Beckett at the casino or the apartment. All fraudulent. His employer should know. Patricia took notes quickly. That could result in termination, which would impact his ability to pay child support and alimony. He should have thought about that before stealing from his employer to fund his double life, I said coldly. I want consequences, Patricia. Real ones. I want him to lose everything he prioritized over his family. She looked at me directly, assessing. You're sure about this? Once we start deploying this evidence, there's no walking it back. This gets ugly. Public. Permanent. He made it ugly when he forgot his daughter 3 times because cards were more important, I said. He made it public when he created a whole separate life with another woman. I'm just exposing what already exists. Then we proceed aggressively, Patricia confirmed. Emergency custody hearing is scheduled for Friday. He'll try to seem reasonable, claim this is a misunderstanding, promise to do better. We'll bury him with evidence before he can perform for the judge. That evening, back at the hotel with Eden sleeping peacefully in the next room, I allowed myself to fully process the affair. Not with tears or heartbreak, but with cold assessment of what it meant strategically. Beckett had handed me everything I needed to destroy his credibility, his finances, his reputation. The gambling alone would have been damaging in court. The affair, especially one funded with marital assets while neglecting his responsibilities, was devastating. My phone buzzed with another message from Beckett. We need to talk. I know you're upset about the poker stuff, but we can work through this. Don't throw away 7 years over a few bad decisions. A few bad decisions. That's how he characterized abandoning his daughter, gambling away our savings, and maintaining a year-long affair. The audacity was almost impressive. I didn't respond, instead forwarding the message to Patricia with a note. Still doesn't know we have the affair documented. Maintaining deception. Her response was immediate. Perfect. Let him think he controls the narrative. Friday will be very educational for him. Friday arrived cold and gray, weather matching the atmosphere in the courthouse hallway. Patricia met me outside the family court entrance, her expression confident and sharp. Beckett's attorney is David Morrison, known for aggressive defense of wealthy husbands. He'll try to paint you as unstable, vindictive, blowing minor issues out of proportion. Don't react, don't engage, let the evidence speak. Inside the courtroom, Beckett sat beside his lawyer. wearing his most expensive suit and an expression of wounded innocence I recognized from every argument we'd ever had. His parents sat directly behind him, his mother dabbing her eyes theatrically. My parents were notably absent, having made clear they wouldn't support what they considered my destructive choices. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to Beckett's attorney, was known for her no-nonsense approach to custody disputes and her particular disdain for parents who put their interests above their children's welfare. Patricia had requested her specifically, and the assignment felt like a small victory. Morrison's opening was predictable. Your Honor, this is a clear case of a vindictive spouse using minor disagreements to weaponize the family court system. Mr. Walsh is a devoted father who made a few understandable scheduling mistakes while managing demanding career responsibilities. Mrs. Walsh has blown these incidents completely out of proportion, documenting normal marital disputes as though they're criminal acts, and now seeks to punish her husband by limiting his access to his beloved daughter. Patricia's response was surgical. Your Honor, this case concerns a pattern of parental neglect, financial deception, and sustained irresponsibility that directly endangers the minor child's welfare. We have extensive documentation proving Mr. Walsh repeatedly abandoned his 5-year-old daughter at daycare, gambled away family savings, and maintained financial commitments that directly conflicted with his parental duties. This isn't about scheduling mistakes. It's about a father who consistently chooses personal entertainment over his child's basic safety. The judge reviewed our initial filing silently, her expression unreadable. I've read the preliminary motions. Mrs. Walsh seeks primary physical custody with supervised visitation for Mr. Walsh until he completes parenting classes and addresses alleged gambling issues. Mr. Walsh seeks equal custody and portrays these concerns as exaggerated. Let's hear testimony. The daycare director, Mrs. Chen, testified first. Patricia walked her through each incident methodically. The first time, explaining how Eden had waited alone for 45 minutes, increasingly distressed, while staff tried unsuccessfully to reach Beckett. The second time, noting the concerning pattern and the conversation with me about ensuring reliable pickup arrangements. The third time, when Mrs. Chen had been forced to tell me that continued enrollment was at risk if the pattern continued. In your professional experience, Mrs. Chen, how common is it for a parent to forget pickup 3 times in 6 months? Patricia asked. In 22 years managing this daycare, I've never seen it happen 3 times with the same parent, Mrs. Chen replied. Once, occasionally, due to genuine emergency? Yes. 3 times with the same parent suggesting a pattern of negligence? Never. Morrison tried to rehabilitate on cross-examination. But Mrs. Walsh did eventually arrive each time, correct? The child was never truly abandoned. The child experienced abandonment from her perspective, Mrs. Chen said firmly. 5-year-olds don't understand traffic or scheduling. They know their parent didn't come when promised. Eden's anxiety around pickup time increased noticeably after these incidents. Next came my supervisor, Rebecca, who testified about the multiple times I'd had to leave work suddenly due to Beckett's failures. Willow is one of our most reliable employees, Rebecca explained, but in the 6 months before her separation, she left early or missed important meetings at least 6 times, always due to pickup emergencies when her husband failed to appear. Morrison tried to dismiss this as normal working parent challenges, but Rebecca shut it down. Normal working parent challenges are occasional, not patterned. What made this notable was Willow's repeated communication beforehand that her husband had promised to handle pickup, yet he consistently failed to follow through. Then Patricia deployed the financial evidence. Bank statements showing Beckett's gambling losses appeared on the courtroom monitors. Each transaction highlighted and totaled $43,000 in 18 months at various casinos and online poker sites. Credit card statements showing an additional $15,000 at bars, restaurants, and entertainment venues, while I paid household expenses alone. Beckett's face went red as the numbers displayed publicly. His attorney objected strenuously. Financial disputes are separate from custody considerations, Your Honor. How Mr. Walsh chooses to spend his personal income is relevant when that spending directly impacts his ability to fulfill parental responsibilities, Judge Morrison interrupted. Continue, Ms. Chen. Patricia pulled up the expense report fraud next, showing Beckett's business submissions claiming client dinners on dates he'd actually been at casinos. Mr. Walsh has been systematically defrauding his employer to fund gambling habits, Your Honor. This demonstrates both financial irresponsibility and ethical lapses that directly affect his parenting judgment. Morrison objected again, more desperately. This is a personal attack on my client's character, not relevant testimony about his parenting capabilities. His character is his parenting capabilities, the judge said sharply. A man who gambles away his daughter's security and defrauds his employer isn't demonstrating sound judgment. I'll allow it. Beckett leaned over to whisper urgently to his attorney, his carefully maintained composure cracking. I could see him calculating, trying to determine how much we knew, how much damage was coming. He thought the gambling was the worst of it. He had no idea what was coming next. Patricia pulled up the investigator's photos. The apartment exterior first, time-stamped over dozens of visits. Then interior shots showing Beckett with Amber, intimate and undeniable. The courtroom went completely silent. Beckett's mother gasped audibly. His attorney's face went white. For 14 months, Your Honor, Mr. Walsh has maintained a separate residence and relationship while claiming financial stress prevented him from contributing equally to household expenses, Patricia said calmly. He spent approximately $60,000 on this apartment and associated costs, money that should have secured his daughter's future, while his wife worked overtime to cover their actual family's needs. Morrison tried to object, but the judge waved him off, studying the photos intently. Where did the funds for this apartment come from? Marital assets, Your Honor, Patricia confirmed. Joint accounts, credit cards in both names, even his business expense account through fraudulent reporting, all while Mrs. Walsh believed they were financially stressed and cut her own expenses accordingly. Beckett finally broke, standing abruptly. This is entrapment. She hired someone to stalk me, invade my privacy. Sit down, Mr. Walsh, Judge Morrison said coldly. You don't get to claim privacy invasion when you're hiding assets and relationships relevant to marital dissolution and custody. Patricia wasn't finished. Your Honor, we've documented at least 6 occasions when Mr. Walsh missed pickup or parenting time because he was at this apartment, including one instance where he told Mrs. Walsh he had a mandatory work meeting but was actually documented entering the apartment at 5:15 and remaining until 10:30. During hours, his daughter needed care. The final piece was Amber Hastings herself, who Patricia had subpoenaed that morning. The young woman sat in the back of the courtroom, her face pale and confused as she processed the revelations. Patricia called her forward. Ms. Hastings, do you know Mr. Walsh? Yes, Amber said quietly. We've been dating for over a year. Did you know he was married? No. Her voice broke. He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife was difficult about co-parenting, which is why I'd never met his daughter. I believed him. Patricia showed her the photos. These are from the apartment Mr. Walsh leased. Did you know he was funding this residence with money from his marital accounts while his wife paid their family's expenses? Amber looked at Beckett with devastation. You said you were struggling financially. I've been paying half the rent for 6 months because you said business was slow. You took money from my account last month saying you needed to cover your daughter's medical bills. She turned to me directly, tears streaming. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known, it's not your fault, I said quietly, the first time I'd spoken during the hearing. He lied to both of us. The judge looked at Beckett with open contempt. So you fraudulently took money from your mistress while telling your wife you couldn't afford household contributions, all while gambling away marital assets and forgetting to pick up your daughter because you were maintaining your double life. Beckett's attorney had no response. Beckett himself sat frozen, his carefully constructed victim narrative demolished completely. His mother was crying openly now, not for me or Eden, but for her son's exposed behavior. I've heard enough, Judge Morrison said. Primary physical custody to Mrs. Walsh. Mr. Walsh will have supervised visitation only, 2 hours weekly at the Family Services Center until he completes parenting classes, provides proof of gambling addiction treatment, and demonstrates consistent financial responsibility for child support. Speaking of which, she looked at Patricia. Proposed child support calculations? Based on Mr. Walsh's actual income rather than claimed financial hardship, we propose $1,800 monthly, Your Honor, plus half of all educational and medical expenses. Granted. Mr. Walsh, you'll also be responsible for full restitution to marital assets for the $60,000 spent on your affair and gambling. Those funds will be transferred to Mrs. Walsh as part of asset division. The judge's gaze was withering. You diverted family resources to fund personal entertainment and an extramarital relationship while your wife struggled to provide for your daughter. That demonstrates profound moral failure and parenting inadequacy. Consider yourself fortunate I'm allowing any visitation at all. Morrison tried one last desperate objection. Your Honor, my client's privacy has been violated. His reputation destroyed by vindictive investigation. His reputation was destroyed by his own choices. Judge Morrison cut him off. This hearing is concluded. Mrs. Walsh, you'll receive written custody orders within 48 hours. Mr. Walsh, first supervised visitation will be scheduled through Family Services, and you're ordered to have no direct contact with Mrs. Walsh except through your attorneys. Dismissed. The aftermath hit Beckett with the force of a freight train, each consequence carefully calculated and deployed at maximum impact. Within hours of the hearing, Patricia had filed the expense report fraud evidence with Beckett's employer. By Monday morning, he was terminated for gross misconduct, losing both his salary and his pension benefits. His boss, furious about the company's liability exposure, made sure the firing included a clause preventing Beckett from working in the industry without disclosing his termination cause to future employers. The gambling losses, now public record through court proceedings, triggered automatic reporting to credit agencies. Beckett's credit score plummeted overnight as creditors reviewed his accounts and saw the pattern of deception. The apartment lease he'd maintained with marital funds? The landlord filed for immediate eviction when the court ordered him to vacate and stop making payments. Amber had already moved out, her final text to him screenshot and forwarded to me by Patricia. "You destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it." His parents, initially supportive, began to distance themselves once the full scope of his deception became public knowledge in our small social circle. His mother called me, not to apologize, but to ask if I would consider quietly settling to prevent further family embarrassment. I declined politely and hung up. Within 2 weeks, Beckett had lost his job, his girlfriend, his apartment, his reputation, and his unrestricted access to his daughter. He moved back in with his parents, a 37-year-old unemployed gambler living in his childhood bedroom, facing $1,800 monthly in child support he couldn't pay from unemployment benefits. Patricia kept the pressure relentless. When Beckett missed his first child support payment, she filed an immediate enforcement motion. When he failed to complete the court-ordered parenting classes on schedule, she filed to suspend even his supervised visitation. Every failure, every missed deadline, every poor choice was documented and weaponized in court. The supervised visitation sessions, when they occurred, were uncomfortable disasters. Eden, after months of consistent stability with me and no broken promises, had formed a protective wariness around her father. She was polite but distant during their monitored 2-hour sessions, clearly relieved when time ended and she could return to me. The court supervisor's reports noted Beckett's attempts to win her over with gifts and promises rather than genuine engagement, his discomfort with actual parenting without an audience to perform for. My parents finally reached out 3 months after the divorce finalized, their call stiff with awkwardness. My mother spoke first. "We saw Beckett's mother at church. She told us about his living situation. We thought you should know people are talking." "Let them talk," I said calmly. "The truth is public record. Anyone interested can read the court documents themselves. There are always two sides," my father tried weakly. "Not in this case," I replied. "There's truth and there's lies." I presented truth. He presented lies. The judge decided accordingly. My mother tried a different approach. "We're worried about Eden growing up without a father figure. This divorce affects her too." "Eden is thriving," I said firmly. "She's in counseling to process the instability her father created, and she's making excellent progress. She has stable housing, consistent parenting, financial security, and adults in her life who prioritize her welfare. That's more than she had when her father was forgetting to pick her up because poker was more important." The conversation ended awkwardly, and I felt no particular emotion about it. My parents had chosen Beckett's image of respectability over their daughters' and granddaughters' actual welfare. That choice had consequences too, ones they were beginning to recognize as social dynamics shifted and people learned the full story. Patricia called one afternoon, amusement in her voice. "Beckett's attorney filed a motion to modify custody, claiming you've alienated Eden from her father and requesting equal parenting time. Based on what evidence?" I asked. "That's the beautiful part. He has none. He's arguing that the supervised visitation is unnecessary now that he's completed parenting classes, and that equal custody would be in Eden's best interest. He included character references from his parents and 2 former colleagues. And you'll respond how? With the supervisor's reports documenting his continued poor judgment, his failure to make child support payments, and Eden's therapist's recommendation that increased exposure to him would be detrimental to her progress. Plus, I'll note that he's been unemployed for 4 months and has made zero effort to find comparable work, suggesting financial irresponsibility continues." The modification hearing was brief and brutal. Beckett, represented by a cheaper attorney now that Morrison had dropped him for non-payment, tried to present himself as reformed. He'd completed parenting classes, he was looking for work. He'd been unfairly portrayed as negligent when he was actually a loving father facing temporary setbacks. Patricia demolished this narrative with clinical precision. "Mr. Walsh claims temporary setbacks, Your Honor. Let's examine the timeline. He's gambled away over $60,000 in marital funds, maintained an affair funded with assets meant for his child's security, defrauded his employer, lost his career due to ethical violations, and in 4 months of unemployment has submitted exactly 7 job applications, all of which he was uniquely unqualified for. This isn't a temporary setback. It's a pattern of sustained irresponsibility and poor judgment." Eden's therapist testified next, explaining that increasing contact with Beckett at this stage would undermine the stability Eden had finally achieved. "Children Eden's age need consistency and reliability above all else. Mr. Walsh has demonstrated neither. The supervised visitation is appropriate for now, allowing them to rebuild trust incrementally without overwhelming Eden with responsibility for managing her father's emotions." The judge denied the modification request entirely. Beckett's face crumpled as the decision was read, reality finally penetrating his delusion that charm and promises could overcome his documented failures. His attorney tried to argue for reduced child support given his unemployment, and the judge considered briefly before denying that too. Mr. Walsh is voluntarily underemployed due to choices he made, Judge Morrison said. He chose gambling, fraud, and extramarital affairs over his career and family. Those choices have consequences. Child support is calculated based on earning potential, not current income. He has a business degree and years of sales experience. His unemployment is a choice, not a hardship. Motion denied. Walking out of the courthouse that day, Patricia beside me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine peace. Not happiness exactly, but the deep satisfaction of seeing justice applied appropriately, of watching someone face real consequences for real harm. He'll appeal, Patricia warned. Guys like him always do. They can't accept that actions have consequences. Let him appeal, I said. I have documentation, witness testimony, and a track record of stable parenting. He has excuses and broken promises. The appeals court will see the same pattern the trial court did. 6 months after the divorce finalized, I stood in my new townhouse, a modest 3-bedroom I'd purchased with my divorce settlement and the recovered marital assets. Eden's room was decorated in her favorite colors, purple and silver, with bookshelves full of books we read together nightly. The kitchen had her artwork magnetized to the refrigerator, each piece a small testimony to the creativity she was finally free to explore without the tension of her father's inconsistent presence. My promotion at work had come through, a recognition of my reliability and dedication, once I was no longer constantly interrupted by pickup emergencies and emotional crisis management. The raise meant I could afford the mortgage comfortably, contribute to Eden's college fund, and even save for vacations without the anxiety of wondering what financial disaster Beckett might create next. Eden was thriving in her new school, her teacher reporting that she was confident, articulate, and showed remarkable emotional intelligence for a 6-year-old. The anxiety that had characterized her final months with Beckett's unpredictability had faded, replaced by the security of knowing exactly what to expect from her primary parent. Beckett had found employment finally. A lower-level sales position at a company willing to overlook his termination history. His supervised visitation continued bi-weekly, and Eden tolerated it with polite distance, no longer expecting reliability or emotional support from him. He was, she explained to her therapist, like a person I used to know who I see sometimes now. The relationship had been fundamentally redefined, his failure to prioritize her creating a chasm that no amount of forced visitation would bridge. The final piece of satisfaction came from an unexpected source. Amber Hastings reached out through social media, requesting to meet for coffee. I almost declined, uncertain what purpose it would serve, but curiosity won out. We met at a neutral coffee shop, both of us awkward initially. I wanted to apologize in person, Amber began, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. I should have questioned more, looked harder at inconsistencies. I feel like I enabled his lying by being naive. You were a victim too, I said honestly. He's skilled at deception. It's not your fault you believed someone you cared about. Still, she insisted, you and your daughter suffered partly because of my relationship with him. That's hard to live with. We talked for an hour, comparing experiences, recognizing patterns in his behavior that he'd replicated with both of us. The conversation was cathartic in unexpected ways. 2 women acknowledging shared experience with a man who'd failed both of us differently, but completely. For what it's worth, Amber said as we parted, watching how you handled everything, the documentation, the legal strategy, refusing to back down, it taught me something important about protecting yourself. I won't be that trusting again. Neither will I agreed, but I won't be afraid either. That's the real victory. 2 years after the divorce finalized, I sat across from a potential date, a teacher named Marcus, who Eden's school counselor had suggested I meet. He was asking about my background, the standard getting to know you questions, when he paused. I heard something through the school network about your ex-husband and a fairly dramatic divorce. I wanted to be upfront that I know about it, but I don't need details unless you want to share them. I appreciated his directness. The short version, he repeatedly forgot to pick up our daughter from daycare because poker was more important, gambled away our savings, maintained an affair for over a year while telling me we couldn't afford basic expenses. I documented everything and divorced him. He lost custody, his job, his girlfriend, and his reputation. That dramatic enough? Marcus nodded slowly. I heard it was fairly one-sided in court, that you had evidence of everything. I did. 6 months of careful documentation before I filed. I wanted to make sure when I left with everything I needed to protect Eden and myself. That's remarkably strategic, he observed. Most people I know would have confronted him immediately, given him a chance to explain. I did that for years, I said. Every time he failed, I gave him chances to explain, to do better. All it got me was more broken promises, and a daughter who thought her father forgetting her was normal. I learned that some people change when confronted with consequences, and others just get better at hiding their behavior. Beckett was the latter. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How's your daughter now? Thriving? Happy? Secure? She sees her father every other week under supervision, and she's polite but emotionally detached from him. Her therapist says that's actually healthy, that she's learned she can't rely on him and has adjusted her expectations accordingly. And you? "How are you?" It was a simple question, but nobody had asked me directly in months. Everyone assumed they knew. I was the vindictive ex-wife who'd destroyed a man's life, or I was the strong survivor who'd escaped abuse, depending on their perspective. Nobody asked how I actually felt about it all. "I'm good," I said honestly. "Not perfect, still processing some things, but fundamentally good. I have a job I like, a daughter I love, financial stability, and a life that's mine rather than one I'm managing around someone else's chaos. I don't regret the divorce. I regret the years I wasted trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed." Marcus smiled. "That's a healthy perspective. My ex-wife and I divorced 5 years ago, and I spent about 3 of those years angry about it before realizing anger was just keeping me connected to someone I didn't want in my life anymore. We talked easily after that, the awkwardness of first dates fading into genuine conversation. When he walked me to my car later, he asked if I'd like to have dinner again sometime. I said yes, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Beckett, in contrast, had stagnated. He'd been fired from the second sales job after 6 months for poor performance, and was currently working retail, a humiliating step down for someone who'd once managed regional accounts. His parents, initially supportive, had grown frustrated with his refusal to take responsibility for his circumstances, and rumor had it they were preparing to ask him to find alternative housing. The supervised visitation continued, but Eden had recently asked if she could reduce the frequency. "He's not mean or anything," she explained to me carefully, "but it's boring. He doesn't really know what to talk to me about, and I can tell he doesn't want to be there either. He's just doing it because the court says he has to." Her therapist supported the request, noting that forcing connection with a parent who showed minimal authentic interest was potentially more harmful than allowing the relationship to naturally decline. We'd filed a motion to reduce visitation to monthly rather than bi-weekly, and Beckett hadn't even bothered to contest it. His attorney sent a brief response essentially agreeing to whatever we proposed, a clear indication that even Beckett was tired of pretending to be an engaged parent. My parents had attempted reconciliation several times, their efforts increasingly awkward as they recognized how completely they'd misjudged the situation. My mother sent birthday cards to Eden with lengthy notes about how much they missed us. My father called occasionally with transparent excuses about needing my advice on random topics. I was polite but maintained boundaries. They'd chosen to support my abuser over their daughter and granddaughter. That choice couldn't be erased with awkward phone calls and cards. Eden asked about them sometimes. "Why don't we see Grandma and Grandpa anymore?" "They made choices that hurt us," I explained carefully. "When Daddy was being unfair, they sided with him instead of protecting you and me. That was wrong, and it meant we needed distance from them. Will we ever see them again? Maybe someday, if they understand why what they did was hurtful and make real amends. But for now, we're better off with the family we've built. People who show up for us, who keep their promises, who prioritize our well-being." She accepted this with the pragmatic wisdom of a child who'd learned early that adults weren't always reliable. Her chosen family now consisted of my close friends, her teachers, her therapist, and Marcus, who'd gradually become a steady presence in our lives over months of careful, slow relationship building. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, the daycare director who'd testified at my hearing, reached out about a year after the divorce. She was retiring and asked if I'd be interested in a position on the board of directors for the daycare, specifically to help develop policies around parental accountability and child welfare during transitional situations. "What happened with your daughter and your ex-husband highlighted gaps in our procedures," she explained. "We need protocols for when we're seeing patterns of neglect or unreliability. Your experience and how you documented everything could help us protect other children more effectively." I accepted, finding purpose in using my experience to help create systemic change. The policy work was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected, transforming personal trauma into practical protections for vulnerable children. The board work also connected me with other professionals in early childhood development, expanding my network and eventually leading to opportunities in education advocacy. 3 years post-divorce, I'd built a life that bore no resemblance to the one I'd had with Beckett. Eden was 8, confident and compassionate, excelling in school and involved in art classes she loved. Marcus and I had moved in together, a careful decision made after extensive discussion with Eden and her therapist. He was gentle with her boundaries, patient with the lingering wariness from her experiences with her father, never pushing for a parental role but offering steady friendship and support. Beckett had essentially faded into irrelevance. He showed up for his monthly supervised visitation, occasionally remembered Eden's birthday, paid his child support sporadically enough that Patricia had to file enforcement motions periodically. But he was no longer a source of stress or anxiety in our lives. He was simply a person who existed peripherally, someone whose choices had removed him from the center of our story. The final closure came unexpectedly. Beckett's attorney contacted Patricia requesting a meeting about finalizing unresolved issues. I agreed to attend with Patricia, curious about what remained unresolved. Beckett looked older, worn down, his expensive clothes replaced with cheaper alternatives, his confident demeanor diminished to something approaching humility. I wanted to acknowledge that I was wrong, he said without preamble, about everything. The gambling, the affair, failing Eden repeatedly. I've been in therapy for the past year, actually working on understanding why I made those choices, and I wanted to apologize directly. I studied him carefully, looking for manipulation or calculation in his expression. What do you want from me, Beckett? Nothing, he said. I know the damage is irreversible. Eden barely knows me. You've built a whole new life, and I'm responsible for all of it. I just wanted you to know that I understand that now, and I'm sorry. Patricia watched the exchange silently, ready to intervene if needed. But I didn't need protection from Beckett anymore. He was just a man who destroyed his own life through choices he made, now living with consequences he'd earned. I appreciate the apology, I said finally, but it doesn't change anything. You had 7 years to prioritize your family. You chose not to. The time for apologies was when Eden was waiting alone at daycare, wondering why her father forgot her. Not now. Years later, after you've lost everything and finally realized what that cost you. I know, he said quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just needed you to hear that I finally understand. We left the meeting shortly after. In the car, Patricia asked if I believed him. It doesn't matter if I believe him, I said. Even if his remorse is genuine, it doesn't undo the harm or obligate me to care about his redemption. He's on his own journey now. Mine is completely separate. And that, ultimately, was the real victory. Not the divorce settlement. Not the custody arrangement. Not even the satisfaction of watching him face consequences. The real victory was building a life so full and satisfying that his presence or absence had become irrelevant. Eden and I had created something stronger than what he'd broken. A family built on reliability, respect, and genuine care. That couldn't be taken away or diminished by his belated understanding of what he'd lost. On Eden's 9th birthday, Marcus helped her blow out candles on a homemade cake while my closest friends cheered from around my dining table. The doorbell rang, and I found a delivery person holding a large package marked from Beckett. Inside was an expensive dollhouse, the kind of impersonal, flashy gift that showed he still didn't know his daughter at all. Eden looked at it briefly before returning to the art supplies her friends had given her, the ones that actually reflected her interests. Should I send Daddy a thank you note? She asked later, the question perfunctory rather than emotional. That's up to you, I said. If you want to, we can write one together. If you don't feel like it, that's okay too. She thought about it. Maybe just a text saying thanks. He probably won't remember anyway. The casual observation, delivered without bitterness or pain, crystallized how completely Eden had integrated the reality of her father's limitations. She expected nothing, was disappointed by nothing, and had built her sense of security entirely independent of him. That was healthier than any forced relationship could have been. As I tucked her in that night, Eden asked quietly, "Mom, are you happy now?" "Very happy," I said honestly. "Are you?" "Yeah," she said simply. "I like our family, just us and Marcus and our friends. It's better than before." "It is better," I agreed, "because everyone who's in our life chooses to be here and shows up when they promise to. That's what real family looks like." She hugged me tightly before settling into bed. As I turned off her light, I realized that was the truest measure of success. Not what I'd taken from Beckett in the divorce, but what I'd built afterward. A home where promises were kept, where showing up was normal rather than exceptional, where my daughter understood her worth wasn't determined by her ability to excuse someone's failures. Beckett had gambled everything and lost, but Eden and we'd won something far more valuable than any court settlement: the freedom to define family on our own terms, surrounded by people who actually deserve to be there.